Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
Evening listeners, it's been a while since I've said this, but welcome to a new episode of Midnight Chats. Feels good to be back. We went away for a little while, had a summer holiday, a few pina coladas, a little lie down, got carried away with the Football World Cup and the heat wave, but now it's back to business and probably a good time to do a little recap. Maybe you've been with us since the start of this podcast just over 2 years ago, or maybe you're listening for the very first time. I'm Greg from Loud and Quiet, and I host these Intern with Stuart Stubbs. And Midnight Chats is our interview podcast series. The idea being that these conversations have a relaxed, late night feel to them, maybe not as rushed or as formal as stuff you might hear elsewhere. And they're done with musicians who make our job worthwhile, which is to say that they're people who we think are interesting, people who we think have something to say. Anyway, we've used this little bit of time off that we've had to make some tweaks, which hopefully you'll like. The big one is we're going to do more. Instead of every fortnight, there will be a new Midnight Chats every week, every Thursday, dropping at midnight. We're also going to be doing these in series. So we're starting now, and this series will run up until Christmas time. And as ever, if you like what you hear, please do subscribe. That means that every time we make a new one of these, you'll get a notification saying there's a new episode and you'll never miss a new Midnight Chats. If you want to go a step further, you can like and you can comment, and that all helps in people discovering our podcast. Before I introduce tonight's guest, just one shameless plug for ourselves. When we're not interviewing people for this, we do a bunch of other stuff, including Loud and Quiet magazine that comes out every month. And while we were away, we launched a new digital subscription to that magazine. It's 15 quid and you get all the issues we make each year, and it's a really good way to support what we do, including this, I guess. So if you want more information on that, it's www.loudandquiet.com/subscribe. Right, let's get on with this. I'm pleased to kick off this new series of Midnight Chats with what I think is a really good episode. At the end of June, I went to meet Daniel Kessler from Interpol. He was in London for a huge show. They were playing with The Cure at Hyde Park. It was in the middle of both England's unlikely run to the semi-final of the Football World Cup and also a British summer heatwave. So despite the fact that it was 33 degrees, I think, that day, Daniel walked into our chat wearing an impeccable black suit, great hair, looked brilliant. I, on the other hand, looked like a sweaty tomato. But we had a really good conversation. There was a lot to talk about, not least that Interpol's 6th album, Mirada, was on the horizon, and that's out now if you want to listen to that. This year marks 20 years since the New York band played their first show, and we talked a bit about those early days in what you're about to hear, their first trip to the UK, recording a live session for the legendary John Peel at Maida Vale Studios, right through to their decision to mark the 15th anniversary of Turn on the Bright Lights last year by playing that album in full at a bunch of shows. But it wasn't all reminiscing. To me, at least, Mirada feels very urgent, like a band who are basically determined not to drift into a permanent state of nostalgia. And you can hear that in the way that Daniel talks about it, and also how you can tell that he's absolutely thrilled that whilst they were rehearsing at the Yeah Yeah Yeahs' space in New York for this record, it got shut down by police for noise complaints. And you can sort of hear that excitement that he had as if he was starting the band for the very first time in the story when he tells that. Anyway, loads of other stuff in there. It's great to be back. We're really looking forward to bringing you some brilliant episodes throughout the autumn here on Midnight Chats. So I'll leave you with this. This is Interpol, episode 51 of Midnight Chats. It's great to be back. Daniel, welcome to our podcast, Midnight Chats.
Thanks for having me.
How are things? Are you well today?
Good. Can't complain.
Obviously, Interpol, famously known as a New York-based band, but you were born in London, right? So you're back in the place where you were born.
I was born here, yeah. It's very true.
Yeah.
So maybe a little family here and stuff like that, so it's always nice to come back.
Been gone a long time though, right?
Yeah, I moved when I was 6. Hence
Okay.
why I lost hence why I lost my British accent and gained an American one.
Do you still feel an affinity to London? Does it just feel like any other city when you visit, or is it something a bit more special than that still?
No, it's much more special. It's my earliest memories in life. It's earliest memories of family. I remember, many aspects about London, when I was like a kid. I mean, 6 is still old enough that you're really, you're forming some cherishable kind of first memories. But no, I still feels like, I don't know if anywhere feels like home to me per se. I guess New York, but England and London still definitely feels very much like a part of me for sure.
And when you come back to London, is it a chance to catch up? That was still very early, so possibly not with friends from that era, but still family based in London, things like that.
Yeah, I have brothers who lives here, so I mean I saw him last night, and it's and I have my godmother lives here, and my mother was from here, or from just outside London and so forth. So yeah, for sure, it feels somewhat of like a homecoming, and somewhere it's not just like an anonymous place; it's somewhere of a connection for me.
And what type of things has London got that you particularly appeal to you? You live in a big metropolis, busy city, similar to London in so many respects, but we have good pubs. We have certain things that maybe other places don't.
Watching the England Belgium match yesterday in a nice pub. So yeah.
Are you a football soccer fan?
I am. I'm not religious. I don't have to watch I don't have to watch every single match. I don't follow the line on every single day and so forth. But yeah, I am. I played football when I was in high school, and again, my first sporting memories are of football and playing with my brothers and stuff like that. And if I have to root for a team, I always root for England as far as in the World Cup and so forth. So yeah.
Terrible game. Well, not
yeah,
terrible.
Intentionally terrible though, right?
Yeah. Oh well, I think that. I mean, they would say not, but it was clear, wasn't it, that it was obviously being played. The game was not being thrown as such, but was certainly tactically placed to move them forward in the competition.
If they had won, I think people would have been more angry than if they had lost. No,
yeah,
ultimately.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, they did right.
What was the atmosphere like where you were? Was it busy? Was it kind of fun to be
it was
out?
pretty civilized. I think everyone was sort of attentively watching the screens, but also realizing that it's in the best interest for them to not win. So kind of moaning when they missed a pretty close shot, but I think if you actually went to further investigation, I'm sure they'd be like, well, actually I don't really want them to score, but yeah, I guess it was a desired result in the end, losing 1-0.
It gets to this point in the year where festivals are happening, big live music events, and all of the sporting competitions, so like the World Cup, and I've over the years so many times found myself being at a festival and there being like England would be playing, and you're kind of like torn, and you're like, well, I want to watch that, but I want to watch this band. From a band's perspective, are there any sports, anything that you're into where if like a clash comes up and you'd be like, I really wanted to watch that? Has that happened over the years at any point?
It hasn't. It's more of a curiosity, I think it's more of a curiosity than anything. I think when like Paul's a really big my bandmate Paul's a really big boxing aficionado, and when Mayweather was last summer when they had the big fight, Mayweather, Conor, McGregor, and
the guy from UFC.
Yeah, right? Paul was definitely. And we were on tour, and we were touring around Europe, and I think it had to be he definitely started planning that one on how we had a conflict as far as where we were traveling. I think maybe we were arriving in Denmark, in Copenhagen, or we were leaving Copenhagen. Either way, basically, everyone was sworn to silence. Because with the time difference, I think the match was in Las Vegas. So with the time difference, no one could utter like any sort of semblance of tipping the result before he had a chance to actually watch it, because they recorded it and so forth. And then I think the next morning he watched it with one of our bandmates in the venue, and I think he succeeded in not knowing the result till he got to that moment.
That's hard these days. All you have to do is turn on Twitter or Instagram, right? Exactly.
So it's harder to. It's really hard to avoid it. It really is.
About a mile from where we are right now, in a few days' time, you are playing with The Cure in London. Not for the first time. Interpol played with The Cure before. What are your first memories of meeting The Cure and performing with them before?
I mean, it was a really, really, really fun tour, and I mean that in full sincerity. They were incredibly hospitable. It was also a fun tour because it felt like a festival tour, because there were these other bands on it. There was Mogwai, who I was, old friends with. I used to work at a record label. Mogwai was they put out their first record on that label, so I was there when I got to meet them when they first came to America for the first time. And so they played, and the Rapture played, and many other bands played, and so there was like a nice camaraderie. And then they would all sort of come down to a nice little improvised like football match at She like after the festival was finished. But just with The Cure, they were just so hospitable, kind, and they really just hung out. It wasn't like there were two ships, theirs and everyone else's. It was all sort of like a nice caravan, and we everyone, it was quite social after the gigs, and hang out, and just sort of it was a really fun tour. I have to say, it was one of the more memorable ones.
So this is the Curiosa.
Exactly,
right?
it was the Curiosa.
Was it about 2004-ish?
That's right.
So you would have been
just before. It was right before we released Antics. We just finished it.
And Robert Smith, because he's just in the last couple of weeks been curating the Meltdown Festival in London. Yeah. Put on an amazing 10 days of music. I think Mogwai actually played one of those nights. Right. But he's these days, from the outside, people perceive him perhaps as a little bit elusive because he doesn't necessarily put himself out there into public attention, doesn't do a lot of interviews and things like that. He doesn't make kind of public appearances for appearances' sake. He kind of gets on with the work and plays in his band and performs live and makes new records. By all accounts, he's actually a pretty fun guy to hang out with, right?
Oh, he's really social, really. I mean, I haven't seen him since, we did that tour. It's been a long time, but mind you, he was really social, really kind, really, all about hanging out, and not, like I said, not removed from all the other bands that were playing the bill. It wasn't a facade. It was actually really a nice camaraderie, and super cool guy. All the bandmates, all of his bandmates were really great. His management was great. Everyone was really cool to us, and it was you never know what to expect when you go on touring with bands who've been doing this for a minute and they have a great legacy. You don't know if it's going to be inclusive or exclusive, and you can't really say what's right and wrong in this. It's really it's everyone has their own journey, and has to do what is right for them to keep the pace going. But he was really he was very present, and so were his bandmates.
Apparently he's a bit of a Steve Albini, and he's very good at the cards. And he often will clear up with his support bands when they don't realise that he's so good.
He did play cards. I don't think I played, but I do remember him being on the back of our bus playing cards with some of my bandmates and maybe some others. So
he gives with one hand, he's like, "Yeah, guys, come on tour with us. Yeah, we'll give you, there'll be a tidy fee." And then the other hand, he's like, "I'm taking my money off. I'm taking your lunch money off you today."
Maybe someone told him that lesson, back in the day.
Probably, yeah. You're playing this show with The Cure, but also in a couple of months' time, at the end of August, you're releasing Mirada, which is Interpol's 6th album. Just kind of untangle the process from where this album started for people listening. So last year we saw Interpol on tour. You were celebrating or marking the 15th anniversary of Bright Lights. So where did the kind of work on this album begin? Does it go back a few years ago now? Just tell us a bit about how it came together.
Well, the songs tend to begin with me. So I think I started writing the foundation of the songs that would eventually end up on Mirada, probably here and there, maybe while touring on the back of our last record, Open Tour. But at that moment, you don't really know if you're writing or not writing. You're more just having a guitar present, playing in between tours, maybe playing a little bit on tour, but you don't know. It's not a real concentrated effort. But then sometimes the ideas come about and you record them and you place them. And then when you are in between tours, you can sort of realize them a bit more, put them into some sort of arrangement and so forth. But I think really when we concluded touring on El Pintor, so probably towards the end of 2015 is when I started really trying to put some efforts into, songwriting. And then and then I think we got together. So I wrote quite a bit over 2015, at the end of 2015 and predominantly in 2016. Paul and I first got together probably towards the end of 2016 and just to see if there was anything there for ready yet and so forth. But much like El Pintor, things kind of, the first few days of the process of writing, seeing if we were ready to write a new record were quite fruitful. And, I don't remember exactly what songs. I guess actually we probably made some good foray into what would become the first song on the record, If You Really Love Nothing. And I don't remember exactly where else we went, but it was pretty clear that, the chemistry was there and we were kind of ready to begin again, to begin anew. And then Sam came by, shortly after that. And then since we're not always in New York at the same time and Sam doesn't live there anymore, we sort of coordinate a schedule. So we do 10 days on or a week on, usually about a week on, I would say, once a month. And then, and it worked for El Pintor, and I think it it's a lot to demand because you don't know if the results will be there, if you're going to have chemistry, if you're going to have ideas. I think knowing that there's a bit of a timeline kind of kept our focus going, and then it gives you a little bit of space to reflect on the material you're working on from afar. So every time we come back together, we, advance a little bit further and so forth. So yeah, it was cool to do this the second time now. Like as we, Elpid tour is a bit of a different process for us. And having that under our belt, I think, made it sort of, us feel kind of confident with exploring what would become the songs for Mirada.
When you marked the 15th anniversary of Turn on the Bright Lights last year by doing those shows, what effect did that have on the process of making, or actually, first of all, why did you feel compelled to do that? Why on the 15th anniversary? Why was that the right time, and why did it feel...
It wasn't something really... It was, we didn't have the idea of doing that until probably something like January of 2017. It wasn't, right. It was like we were already,
quite
starting to...
instinctive. Then.
Yeah, we'd already initiated the process of this, what would become, the songwriting for Mirada. And, but we never contemplated doing something like this before. We've never done tours in between records, even though, in this day and age, a lot of our bandmates, a lot of our friends who are in bands do that quite often without, overthinking it. But we usually just tour quite a bit on the back of a record, disappear for a few years, come back for a new record and begin, once more. And but when the idea was sort of raised, it didn't take, it wasn't sort of like, no, everyone was sort of like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And it was a real quick decision, and no one overthought it. And I think somewhere along the way, we were already by the time we actually ventured out, by the time we started rehearsing for the Bright Lights tour, probably in July, towards the end of July or something like that, we were pretty far along with the songwriting with Mirada. So it felt like kind of like a healthy thing to basically for once try to do something a bit different where so now we're, I would say 90% there as far as actual, at least the music. Maybe Paul was still working on vocals and lyrics, but 90% there, go out on tour, leave these songs alone for several months really, because we toured all of August into September in Europe, and then we went to LA and New York towards the end of September, beginning of October, and then played Mexico 2 nights the third week of October. So we didn't really start writing it or get back together and start playing the songs until the end of November. I think we just did 1 week of a session, but the songs came running back to us, and we felt like a good place of what we captured. We liked the direction we're going in, and a week later went in and we did our first recording session for Mirada. So it was good. And I think it kind of, I think maybe like neglecting them for a few months, but knowing that they're still there and forgetting about them, switching gears was, I think we had suspicions it'd be like a healthy thing to do, but it really was. It was cool. I mean, we didn't need to do it, but it was definitely didn't hurt us by having that come about.
And it's interesting hearing you say that it was a very instinctive thing to do, because I know that some bands kind of and ah about whether doing something like that is the right thing to do, because it feels like looking back at a time when a lot of artists want to always just be looking forward. But it sounds like you guys were like, well, that would be a fun thing to do.
I mean, we were looking forward, obviously you feel more passionate, not more passionate than one record or the other, but you feel more passionate just in life about what's happening in your, at that moment, future, yeah. And certainly from an artistic perspective, like the work you're doing now, you should kind of feel like, oh man, I'm more invigorated by this than anything we've done previously. That's whether someone else feels the same way or not, that's debatable. But from an artist, position, I can get, what's the point of doing something trying to, if you don't feel fully invested in it, you just might as well just do something else. And I think, we never forced being a band. We're a band together still to this day, because we still have great chemistry when we write music and when we play together and so forth. And, I think we have, we're quite different from one another in many ways, but I think when we're together writing music, I think we have probably something in common where we do think we're still advancing and getting better and better. And and the fact that, I love that. I mean, I never wanted to be a band that sort of divorced themselves from their first record or certain songs. I always want to be, I'm happy to play anything that people want to hear. And I just also don't, when we're making Bright Lights and other records, especially Bright Lights, I can say since it's the first record, I was really very mindful of like, well, this is kind of forever. Whether people actually care about this record or not, eventually I had no idea. But it's more of like, I want to be okay with this record forever. Meaning that, years later, if I'm playing it, I should be okay with that versus, well, I don't know what I was trying to do there. I never want to be a band that was trying to do things besides what we wanted to do. I didn't want to try to please other people. I think artistically we try to please ourselves. And hopefully if we're into what we're doing, then other people will be into it too, which is kind of what, sort of the catalyst of the songs that would be on Bright Lights. So that's kind of sort of our formula to date, I think.
By the time people hear this, Mirada will be out. I think it sounds like Interpol's most urgent record to date. It feels like there's an energy about it that feels like a determination. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it feels really invigorated. Did it feel like that making it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to it. I agree. I think it was I don't think it was intentional as much as that's just what came out. I think the songs were coming out of me a little bit like that, and then when we were, writing them in the rehearsal space, I think writing sometimes in New York, there's no ideal rehearsal space. It's always sort of, where we settled upon was basically the same place where we wrote our Love to Myra, our third record, which is just, one of the few buildings where there's like still bands rehearsing there, and you can hear all the bands coming through the wall. So you really have to. It's something that it's a lesson you learn early on if you're intending to play music in New York, and even more so nowadays because there's even fewer rehearsal spaces or complexes. You just got to really just drown out what's coming through the walls and just do what you're doing, and just even whether it's other bands or like taxis or cars, you're just concentrating on what's happening in that room, what your bandmates performing and what you're performing and the energy and so forth. So I think in general, I think there was also kind of just the songs. There was a bit of like a rawness to the way we were playing them together, and probably an urgency too. And then I think working with Dave Fridman, we didn't really know what it would be like. Obviously we're great admirers of all the the many great, wonderful records that he's worked on, but they're all quite varied. They're from MGMT to The Spoon to Flaming Lips to Mercury Rev. Mixing some of the mixings that he's done for like Tame Impala. It's not really one cohesive thing. It's all over the place. So I knew we were making a really live record. That's what it felt like to me, and I really wanted to keep that. And so, but we wanted to be open too. We wanted to leave plenty of room for Dave. The idea of going to work for a producer for the first time was to leave room for him to say something. And I think until probably not that long ago, we probably would have been like a step back with someone else. We're very sort of a punk rockers kind of like, oh, we got this, but we wanted to be open. To if he has an idea, we wanted to like listen to it. So, but I think from him listening to the rehearsal recordings that we've done, we're a band that very much like even pre-Bright Lights, we go in the studio when the songs are really have an identity, when they're kind of we can play them from start to finish, and and this was no different. So what we were sending were really finished songs. There weren't many songs with holes in them. Maybe there'd be portions where Paul hadn't finished like the lyrics or maybe a vocal here and there. But the actual identity of the songs as what ended up on the record was already happening in the rehearsal space. And so I think, when he listened to them, I think that's when he basically, probably the reason why he wrote us an email. He's like, thinking of recording this, all in 2-inch tape. And which we've always recorded to 2-inch tape, but we usually after a certain point, just for ease and expediency, just dump it into Pro Tools just to do guitar overdubs, just to make it faster and not have to overthink things. But I think because he heard that the songs were quite realized and he didn't have any issues with the arrangements, and I think he liked it. I think he wanted to maybe more exploit that attribute of the actual songs, the inherent songs, and I think that's one of the major contributions that he had to the record. And it was cool that he did that versus, I don't know. He's like a specialist. It's interesting. He doesn't have one, like we were saying, doesn't have one particular approach that he just applies to all the records he works on. I think he listens, he thinks, and then he gets an idea, and then he wants to see it through. So I think he wanted to capture that identity, that rawness, that liveness, that urgency, and which really was pleasing to me because I wanted to keep that too. I didn't want it to become too smooth. I wanted it to sound like a dirty guitar jumping off your stereo, and I wanted Sam's drums to snap at you, and I wanted to sound like a band playing in the room, and I think that's what it sounds like. And I don't think it sounds anything like Turn on the Bright Lights, but Turn on the Bright Lights does sound like it sounds like us as we were playing at that moment, and that was the idea of making that record. Was really just wanted to make it sound like us, and as we were like as a rehearsal room, and that was one of the things that we just didn't want to overcomplicate it. And I would say to the degree we didn't have any goals so much for Mirada, as much as I would say, well, no, that sounds like us the way we played those songs, live when we play together.
And one day you're rehearsing and the cops turn up at the door.
Well, this is before we went into this other. Yeah, that was the first half, like two halves here. The first half of the songwriting on this record, we were sharing the wonderful Yeah Yeah Yeahs rehearsal space on the Bowery. It was like the greatest rehearsal space I've ever been in, and it was also kind of the most classic sort of rehearsal space in the sense that it was like subterranean. You have to lift up a grate from the sidewalk in the Bowery in New York City, and so just like literally, it was the most romantic thing if you want in terms of rock and roll. Is literally a half block from CBGB's and like right by Phoebe's, which is now it's kind of like a night, like a sporting kind of diner, but back in the 70s and Ramones days, it was sort of like one of those places that all those guys hung out at. Anyway, but yeah, and it was great. And the yeah-yeahs, they hadn't been using it in a while. They're mostly in LA, and but they were really kind about letting us use it and sharing with them. And it was decked out with all their, their touring paraphernalia and so forth. And it was so cozy and so nice, and it worked great for the longest time. I mean, you couldn't, you're down there, it just felt so comfortable, it sounded great. And then, after I don't know, maybe a couple months, you got like the first complaint from the cops, and they have to actually kind of figure out where it is. You have to go really downstairs, and then after a while, the landlord, who was really cool too, she got another complaint it was a neighbor, and then we tried to meet the neighbor. We tried to reason with him, we tried to be like, appease to him, and he seemed like we were getting somewhere. But then soon enough, a cop arrived at the second time, and then it was basically very much, made clear that we need to get out of there, otherwise face consequences. So I felt bad for the yes, but I think they knew that, that neighbor had already complained, and, their days there were like numbered and so forth. So sadly, we had to like sort of in a scramble decamp, and then we had to, go back to the same building that we recorded. We wrote Our Love to Admire in 10 years ago. So it all worked out just fine, but still it was too good to be true. And some certain elements of New York this day and age are too good to be true, or or no longer too good to be true, I should say.
I think London's similar. One of the things that I was thinking about earlier was looking back on Interpol and the things you've done in the years previous. Back in the very early days, you recorded a session for John Peel at the Maida Vale Studios in London. I think like early 2001, around that time.
It was April 2001, yeah.
So Maida Vale is a studio. So for people listening, most people will know Maida Vale Studios hosted so many bands over the years. It's a bit of a rite of passage if you get to go in there and record a session for the BBC. But the BBC are moving out of Maida Vale soon, and
no way, really?
moving to a new facility in Stratford, and Maida Vale won't be what it was. And so like, it's kind of sad to see buildings, particularly buildings that have housed such kind of historic moments, change.
Obviously we put out our first EP on Chemical Underground, and it was a big moment for us. And they were all the people who were Chemical Underground, the Delgados, the band. They were supportive of the band since since the beginning, and they were like super cool. And then they had this idea of the series, and they offered to put out a couple of our tracks from our first 2 demos, and it was a big thing. And then through that, we were a band for something like 3. We recorded that demo actually March or February, we played our first show March 98, and then we recorded that demo like June 98. But consequently, in all that time, we still, you just kind of weren't really getting anywhere, weren't moving forward, and you really want to tour. You want to try to give yourself a reason to continue as a band, and then they decided to put that out, and then through that, we really wanted to come to the UK and do like a little tour, whether it was practical or not, or whether it was going to be economical, or we're going to like lose a ton of money. But one of the ways that we actually made it work was that they helped us, Chemical Underground helped us get a Peel session, which, obviously was, John Peel was a legend, and then it just all the Peel sessions were like, oh my God, that, so-and-so did a Peel session, blah, 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 I can't believe this. And on top of it was, we just really wanted to go to the UK and just do some dates, and they gave you like a little bit of money to record that, which was like, great, maybe we can put that towards like renting a van and flying over here with like, and we had no money, so we did. And the tour, for the most part, I wouldn't say a disaster, but it didn't really work. I didn't do anything, played a funny, well, anyway, it just didn't really work out. And then, but the culmination was that we were going to do this Peel session towards the end, and it was great. It was really great. And I remember I saw the engineer Simon, he was like amazing, and it's a really wonderful experience. But because of some of those recordings, eventually it led us to being signed to the label that we're still a part of, Matador, and that's and so I think we owe a great debt to that session, and we have great, it's also those romantic early days of actually doing something, doing something, kind of people actually being interested in what you're doing. We didn't have that many things to go on back then, so someone offering us a Peel session was a huge thing, and consequently had a great repercussion onto why we're still able to play music now, I think.
Was that a buzz being stood in those legendary Maida Vale studios? You got all your kit set up, you've got your headphones on, and then the voice of John Peel comes down the line, and it's like evening Interpol.
Well, I think when you record it separately than that. I think
Right.
at the end he broadcast it like that, and so yeah, hearing him do that was definitely a trip. And we, it wasn't like we had no press back then. It was maybe at the very beginning of people paying attention to, the music coming out in New York. So yeah, the Strokes had already started receiving quite a bit of attention and so forth. But still, like we had, those little things were definitely they were big moments for us, and not even because they led to other ones, but just it was a thrill. I think for us to record there, it was a thrill to have it actually go out, and it definitely encouraged us to keep going.
What's it been like being in a band that has straddled the pre-internet era and the post-internet era? Because like you say, early days of the band, late 90s, early 2000s, you come to the UK, you do something like a John Peel session, which is a big tick box, as you already said, like you've a real buzz to do that. And there are a certain handful of channels that you would go down to try and get your music heard. 20 years on, 18 years on, it's obviously a completely different world in terms of the way that people consume music. So have you always just gone with the flow with the way that things have changed, or do you have fond memories when things were a little bit maybe more straightforward or simpler, or maybe they weren't at all? I don't know.
I don't know. I used to work at record labels and stuff like that, so to me, I think I've just kind of always rolled with things, and I think with Bright Lights, I never had any other expectations besides hopefully making a record and putting it out on a record label that I loved, and so as soon as we signed a Matador and made a record, I had no expectations beyond that. The fact that people, for instance, actually were interested in, sort of had a slow growth, but it kind of word of mouth sort of spreading, and it felt very much like, I think Bright Lights is way more in common with the decades prior of the music industry, like word of mouth and build and so forth. And in America, college radio still had like a lot of impact on actually, spreading things. And every time we went on tour, we got a little bit bigger versus, obviously now where things can go from 0 to, 120 like in no time. And then, but by the time we put out Antics, it was, we finished it. It leaked by like 2 weeks after we finished it, and like 3 months before it came out or something like that. Like we were on tour with The Cure actually, and and people were reviewing it like in the dailies or in the weeklies when we were going by. And I was like, yeah, they're reviewing basically a bootleg, and I think that was the beginning of like records leaking like that kind of. I mean, not our record, but it was around that same time that things were happening. So I think even then I was sort of like easy come, easy go. I mean, I'm fortunate that we're touring, we're playing, we're doing this, but like I can't control those elements. And now we've seen, I think, multiple cycles since then, with if seemingly, music industry going further into an abyss with no, bottom as far as like creating a model where people are actually going to buy records or find, some sort of commerce for it, to downloads and working here and there, like on iTunes and stuff like that, to now streaming, which is now sort of like really taking its course and become a legitimate thing, a legitimate entity, and people are responding to. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't know if it's completely settled upon where it's going to go. Who knows? But I think it's, the very least, it's not a boring time. It's an exciting time, and I think it's also an egalitarian time in the sense that if you have like maybe taste that is a bit searching, a bit more out there, but you live in a remote location, you're not punished for that. You're not just like, well, you got to go down to the local supermarket and buy what they have. You can be like, well, I like this, and now I can through this source I can get that record, I can listen to it, and so forth. And I think that was the thing that struck me even back in when like around the Antics time, was like, cool, man. So if like a kid lives like I don't know, just somewhere really remote,
Somebody in Peru is listening
somewhere
to
in Peru,
Antics.
and somewhere like in Indonesia, somewhere like where there aren't, like somewhere remote and very rural, they have that access, they have that taste, and I think that's very fair to me, and that's just, versus back in the day, maybe you're only subject to your environment, and that's not quite fair. So I saw, I was like, I think I was even optimistic back around the Antics when the record leaks. I was like, okay, well, the plus side is that music is probably at an all-time, popularity level, and I think that's great.
I've read before that Paul saying that he still takes the most enjoyment out of making a record, and if he could, he'd make 3 albums a year and like not tour as much. So do you think the music industry will eventually, the way we've seen things emerge have been that as it's less financially viable selling records, people don't make as much money, in the current climate with streaming and things like that, and like touring's become such a big deal because it's such a big revenue for all bands. Do you think though it will grow to the point where that is a complete circle, and like streaming will be so omnipresent that maybe there will be artists that can just make music again, recorded music, and live off that?
I don't know. I think anyone who's like yes it's like how can you really tell?
Yeah.
You also have to think that, you know, I mean, just how like it took us, you know, 4 years to even get signed. There's so much music out there right now, you know, because you don't have to wait, you know, you put anything up there. So I don't know, it's like I don't look at music and other people doing stuff as competition, but you could say that there's a lot for people to digest and to choose from. So I don't know. I don't look at, but you know, to me, it's like I don't really overthink that stuff. Like I like playing shows. I like touring. And I think Paul does too. It's just like after all, yeah, there's a bit of a grind. So just, you know, sleeping on like someone on the run in a different hotel night after night, or sleeping on buses, or, you know, border crossings and things like this. It takes its toll a little bit, and if you want to advance other elements of your life, but yeah, I don't know if it's really. Also, it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of good to do things and then just kind of disappear for a little bit, make people kind of miss you and pay attention to what you're doing. That's the way I guess I am a little bit about stuff.
We mentioned New York earlier. You still live in New York. As the city's developed and changed, and obviously like everybody gets a bit older, do you still love it as much as you did when you first moved there, when you were first making music there? How have things changed? Is it still a place that feels vibrant and exciting and fit for where you are in your life now?
I think New York's a great place to come and go. It's like, it's really feels good to leave that place, and it feels really great to return to it, like no other place. And I think that holds true for like a lot of people who live there for a while. But unfortunately, I do travel quite frequently, and I know not to overstay my welcome there. It's still my home. I've seen, you know, I've lived there for so many years. I've seen so many changes. I can't pretend that it's, you know, it's definitely an affluent place, you know, like not even just Manhattan. I think Brooklyn's pretty affluent in parts, or more parts are affluent now than they were, let's say, 10 years ago, which is, you know, some parts have really gentrified that no one ever thought would be possible. And that's just a fact of it. But I think that, you know, like you're saying, London's done the same, Berlin's done the same, many other cities have done the same. It's something that's happening all over the world. I still like New York. There's an ease about it. Not an ease, but there's an ease. If you want to, you can have those great days where you can just do so many wonderful like cultural things in one day. And it's a small and it's fascinating. It's a small little, like Manhattan's a small little island where you can go to some of the world's most incredible museums. You can go to this restaurant. You can go to that. You can take a nice bike ride up here. You can have like really the best of days, and you can make it all happen. And there's something about that. I still have that romantic notion for this. But if I'm there for too long, then yeah, it starts weighing on me. And there's elements of it that do drive me crazy. Like, you know, I spent a lot of time in Europe and, you know, Mexico and stuff like that. And it's just like in New York, you go out to dinner for someone and you don't want to go to like a completely shitty restaurant, but you want to go, you know, to like an okay restaurant. It's just like you have 2 glasses of wine each and you know, maybe 2 dishes each. And all of a sudden you're paying like just, you know, hundreds of dollars. And it's like, what is this? And well, there's other parts of the world that just are not anywhere near that, you know, I mean. So yeah, so I those elements definitely they try me at times, you know. But overall, like I said, like in doses, I think when I'm there, I you know, have so many great friends there, I have so much history there. I do still try to look on the positive, what it has to offer, especially on the cultural elements. It's all right there if you want it. But I do really enjoy going and really detach myself and going kind of to a polar opposite location, offering something completely different. And I don't feel like I have. When I'm not in New York, I don't think I'm missing out on things. I'm pretty good about being present and where I'm at that moment, and just trying to like, just explore what that city, what that location has to offer, and really making the most of that, you know.
You mentioned the lack of things like rehearsal space these days. As properties got more expensive, things have had to move out of the city, and opportunities perhaps aren't what they were. Is there any part of you that think is kind of glad that you started out when you did, when there were more opportunities? Like, do you think there are, if you were starting a band now in New York City in 2018, is it a tougher thing to get going?
So I don't know, you know, because I think when we started out too, there were only 2 real clubs that mattered in the sense of, you know, labels and having some sort of repercussions on your advancement as a band. That was like the Mercury Lounge, which is still there, and Brownies, which is no longer there. And so you just kind of ping pong back and forth, and you know, they would count people at the door and see who's coming for you. They'd ask them. So it was kind of like you really would, but, you know, since then, there's many, 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 many more clubs that have opened up. I mean, not just, you know, I mean, Brooklyn really became a really sort of a pinnacle spot to play. And And just in Manhattan, there's many spots. In Brooklyn, there's many spots. And people were kind of open. There's new spots still sprouting up that are just as vital. Sometimes new spots don't really have to earn their way. People get really excited about them right off the bat. And they're more vital than somewhere that's been there for like a long time, which wasn't really the case when we started out. I'm happy that things happened the way they did for us because, it didn't come easy. We could have easily broken up many times. We made 3 demos before this, we got signed. The same label that signed us eventually rejected our first 2 demos, even though a lot of the songs are on both demos, so including PDA, which is on our first demo. Granted, it wasn't as executed as well as maybe, like what would end up on the record. For sure, it wasn't. But still, we weren't so far, of course, of what would be the direction for the songs that would end up on Bright Lights. And but at the same time, it's sort of like, in kind of, maybe to draw on like an American sports saying, like the minor leagues, in baseball, you don't get called up to the major leagues until you're ready. And so in that sense, I don't know if we were ready or not ready. The timing wasn't ready for us. And so, but it was very difficult, and it was hard to keep the band together. And it was, it's really fortunate that we just did, and we crossed some sort of threshold, probably maybe a year, like in a year before we made the Bright Lights, we got signed, where we just kind of, I think we were hitting a streak of writing like NYC Obstacle 1 and some other songs that I think for me, I remember leaving a rehearsal early on, and, with no sort of prospects that anyone was going to sign us, we'd ever make a record, but having a particularly good rehearsal, feeling maybe really, really excited about something we just were working on. And I had this calm and reflection to myself that I was like, if no one ever hears any of this, at least I'm getting something out of it. It doesn't have to be, the culmination doesn't have to be recording an album and so forth. And I meant it. Like, I just was getting something out of it, and, I was trying to find the peace in that, because I had no reason to think that there was anyone interested by, in the stuff we're doing. Hence why when we did put out Turn on the Bright Lights, that there was a reaction. It was like nothing I could anticipate it, because every record label in the world rejected us. So why would I think there'd be an audience for us, That said, I think it sort of kind of created something for us that when we had to write like Antics, or we sort of were able to sort of just kind of put windows up and not think about expectations, what people wanted, and just do whatever we wanted to do, because that's what we'd had that time to sort of formulate as a band, as a writing entity, and so forth. So we didn't overthink, we're just going to keep doing what we've always done. We just blocked out the noise, and we also didn't overthink. We didn't take too much time, right? We're very conscientious of writing in between tours of Bright Lights, so we kind of get a head start before we had too much time on our hands. And so when we did finally stop touring for Bright Lights, we already had like a good stock of songs that would end up on Antics, and I think that was part of definitely like very conscientious. Let's not get ourselves into the situation where we have a blank slate after touring for a long time and feeling a little bit, like it was a bit of a weight around our neck. And but yeah, it's a very different time period. I don't know. I think it's probably the plus side is for new bands that you have the internet to get your music out there, and I do still believe that good music will be heard. I felt that way even back then, even though I did. But I think that way now. But the difficult thing is, like, I don't know which is the best way to get it out there, and it's everyone has the opportunity to put it up there, and like in the various ways that are obvious to us. Whether you get heard because you're good or not good, I don't know, but I do believe it will be heard. I do believe that's what you have to do, and you just have to do it for yourself, and not overthink, like, I'm doing this for this, I hope this happens because of this. You just, if you find collaborators, if you need them, if you're not doing everything yourself, then just do it for you, and keep it simple. And then I think good things can come about if things are feeling right to you.
We talked a bit about those very early days working with Chemical Underground, doing the first John Peel session, right up to celebrating the 15th anniversary of Turn on the Bright Lights, and then making a 6th album, Mirada. We head into almost the third decade of Interpol in the next couple of years. Do you still love it? Do you function better as a band these days now that you've known each other for 20 odd years? Like, how are you feeling generally about it all?
I mean, I think, yeah, I do. I mean, I really love my bandmates. I feel really fortunate to have this. It's incredible that I've gone to, I love traveling. I love the fact that I have friends all over the world. I love the fact that I've learned so many things. I feel this is something that I think I always wanted to be a sailor, and I got to become a sailor. And then the fact that, we're not still a band because, this is it's our livelihood, this is what we do, or an insecurity thing. I really don't think that it's, I think it's always sort of, those early days of songwriting between Paul and I, especially right at the beginning, where it's like the last 2 records being very fruitful right off the bat, and, a couple of songs forming their identity right away. I think that's more of a testament, like, oh yeah, we still have much more to say. We're still going forward. And I think we all feel that way, you know, and I think the three of us after Mirada, we really felt it was probably the most on the same page we've ever been, you know, as far as leaving a record, being like, we feel good about what we did. We feel really happy about this. I mean, there's a degree of like, you can't control how people are going to, you know, react to it, receive it, what they're going to say. And that's the beautiful thing about music. It's not subjective. I mean, it's not objective. People think it is, but it's not. It's, you know, maybe you love Antics because maybe that's where you met your future wife, like around that time, listening to that record, or maybe Our Love to My or Bright Lights or what have you. But, you know, at least from our perspective, I think we feel Mirada, you know, holds its own compared to anything we've done to date, and is, you know, us moving forward. And so I think that galvanizes us to keep doing it. And, you know, it's that's why we did it. That's the only reason why we did it, is because we feel like we still have more to say. And I, you know, I really love, I think, you know, when we play the songs, just even practice, I think we feel has an energy, and we can't really wait to play them live. And I think these are the reasons why we're still a band to this day, and, you know, and onwards.
Midnight Chats is a Loud and Quiet podcast. Production by Emma Snook. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.